Hello, 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 and thank you guys for coming back today. Sorry I'm so late with this, but better late than never, right? That's what I always say. But so, in the interest of time, yours and mine, I'll just jump right into our first estate planning tool. It's the one that is the most widely used and probably the most well known, which is your last will and testament, better known as the will. And most of you probably know a will is just a legally binding document where the testator, that's the person whose will it is expressing their wishes with regard to their possessions and their loved ones. So it basically just describes who the testator is, what their belongings are, what they have in their possessions, and who they want to get it when they die. The thing about wills and having one is you should definitely have one, but most people like start and end their estate plan with a will. That's a big mistake. A will is not like the go-to estate plan. It's more of like your just in case document. It's an estate planning tool of last resort. It's what you employ when your other estate planning tools don't work out, or if you're um, joint tenancy or other probate avoidance techniques fail. It's a safe harbor, really, more than an estate plan. But if you have one, because you should, you're still doing better than most. Because a will allow you to appoint an executor and executrix to administer your estate so that things are carried out the way that you want them to be. With a will, you can also appoint a guardian for your minor children. As far as your executor or executrix, you can um, basically describe what their powers and limitations are, also as it relates to your property and possessions, and dispose of all your property. Clearly, that's what the will's main job is to do. So, failure to have a will drafted and having no other estate planning techniques employed means that you die intestate, and then your assets are going to be distributed by the rules of intestate succession. And that basically, it varies by state, but across the board, for the most part, I think it's like 50% goes to your spouse, and then the other 50% is split equally amongst your children. And if you don't have a spouse, then it's just split equally amongst your children. I can go into details about what happens if you don't have this spouse or any children, but that's more of another conversation. Suffice it to say that it really just goes by your heirs, that your assets will be distributed to your relatives, next of kin. There you go. So what intestate succession doesn't account for is kids that you may want to disinherit or spouses that you may want to disinherit. You could have died while you had been separated from your spouse for 35 years, but you're still married to them on paper. And if you didn't have a will, then by intestate succession, they're still getting 50% of, what's left. So, and this is unrelated but important. When you're thinking about heirs, so this is for my single moms who fight against legitimation. Just know that what you're also doing is cutting off your kid's right to be considered an heir at law to their father and their father's family. So when stuff like this comes into play, intestate succession, you may want to have your kid being recognized as an heir of both your family and his, just so that they can get all there is to get out there. Okay, so now that you know what a will is and the importance of one, let's get you one drafted. So that was pretty much the goal of my webinars this week, was to help everyone draft an estate plan themselves. My poor man's estate plan. So, in order to have a will, a legally valid will, there's just a few requirements. One is it must be a writing. It actually can be handwritten. That counts. They call those holographic wills. It's just that the entire will has to be handwritten in order for it to suffice as a holographic will. But yes, it must be a writing. The testator, the person whose will it is, has to have testamentary intent. That basically means that he has to have a desire to draft this will and to distribute the property the way that it's mentioned in the will. So he could not have been a victim of fraud, duress, or undue influence. That means he did it voluntarily and, on his own volition. Testamentary capacity is another requirement of a valid will. And that basically says you have to be the legal age of majority in your state, and you have to have the capacity to make a will. So the capacity to make a will is different from like mental capacity under like other legal standards. What it basically boils down to is if you know the nature of your act, which is, do you realize that you're making a will? You have to know the natural objects of your bounty. That's the language that they use. I would never say anything like that, which is basically who your heirs are. You have to know the nature and extent of your property. That's basically what you have. And you have to understand like how you're disposing of it. The other requirement for a valid will is it must be signed by the testator, signature. And then there must be witnesses. So these are competent adults of the legal age and majority who also know what they're signing, that they're signing a will and witnessing it for that purpose. The number of witnesses varies by state, so you do want to at least become familiar with your state probate laws to find out what the requirements are for your will. But I mean, these are the requirements that I just gave you, that it must be a writing, testamentary intent, testamentary capacity, signatures, and witnesses are requirements of every will, but there could be differences as far as like how many witnesses are required to make it valid, that type of thing, and like who qualifies as a witness. So that varies from state to state. But as long as your will meets the above basic requirements, it will be a validly binding document. Well, it does have to have like substantive, can't just be your signature and the witness signature. It does have to have at least one substantive provision, just one, at least one, that relates to the disposition of your property. Your will can be modified, amended, explained, anything like that later by creating what is called a codicil. And a codicil is basically just another piece of paper, another writing that meets all of the qualifications of a will. So that means it must be a writing, there must be testamentary intent, testamentary capacity, has to be signed, and there has to be witnesses to it. And you attach it to the will. So it's basically like if you wanted to change your will, if you came into some more money, you had some more assets, had another kid, that type of thing. If you wanted to modify your will without having an entirely new will drafted, you can just have a codicil drafted, and then attached to the original will. And that is pretty much it, believe it or not. That is the poor man's will. So let me just break it down to you guys. I'm going to give you, I wish I had like not a computer, but my technology came up, because then I would be able to put this on a chalkboard for y'all and be fancy and stuff. But this is not my actual will, but this is as simple as your will can be. Like, hey, okay, I, Lorraine Funderburg of Atlanta, Georgia, born on the 10th day of September in some year, hereby make and declare this as my last will and testament. Pretend this is a writing, because it does have to be a writing, guys. I hereby appoint such and such to serve as my executrix. My executrix will pay off all my debts, and the remainder of my assets will be distributed, in equal parts to my children, their names, date of birth, boom. And witness hereof, I set my hand on this seal unto this last will and testament. Date, signed, me, got some witnesses, and there you have it. That is as simple as your will needs to be. Now, you probably don't want it to be that simple, because you probably have a lot more going on. But even if you don't, and even if you use some of the other estate planning tools, which I'll be teaching you guys about later this week, then your will really should be that simple, because everything else would have been taken care of in some other estate planning tool. So just to recap, the benefits of having a will: to leave property that can't be left by other estate planning devices, like a car, for an example. You definitely don't want to put a car in a trust because it raises all kinds of issues when it comes to like trying to get it insured because it's not an actual person. Uh, you want to use it just in case. A will be good for property that was that was given to you after your will was created. So if it was like suddenly acquired, say you had a will drafted, and then the next day you all of a sudden came into some money that you weren't aware of that was coming, and then you died 2 days later. So none of your other estate planning tools would be able to capture any of that except for your will. And so, dispose of any property that's not covered under any other probate avoidance device. You need a will to name a personal guardian for children. No other estate planning device will do that. And if you have property that you expect, but you do not actually, it's not yours yet, such as an inheritance, for an example, would have to be willed away. And if you wanted to disinherit anybody, keep any of your relatives from get into any of your things, you want to do that by will. So yeah, guys, there is your poor man's will, and I will see you guys tomorrow. Thanks for joining. Good night.